Carl asked the question about event sourcing. For the record, I think that's a solved problem in the sense that the web annotation standard and partial implementations such as hypothesis or memex, I think, are amply able to solve that problem. There's even interesting extensions to hypothesis where any web page or PDF that is linked through hypothesis is sent to the web archive, ensuring a form of permanence. So yeah,
Can I respond to that?
My comment on that. Yeah, go ahead.
I was saying, so I'm not intimately familiar with hypothesis, but I've used it some to understand its workings, and I think it's far from solved. I think that hypothesis is kind of a note-taking tool online, but it doesn't offer any of the claim integration or deep sourcing information that would I think a platform like this would want to offer.
I think it does offer deep sourcing. Actually, I agree. It doesn't offer claim integration. It's not claim aware, but claim sourcing. There's kind of two parts. There's pointing. There's deep sourcing, and there's claim awareness. And what I'm saying is the deep sourcing part has been mostly solved by hypothesis. They're smart enough, for example.
Antoine, you don't know what I mean when I say deep sourcing. And I know I introduced a term without defining it, but you can't know what someone's saying.
Okay. Well, I know there's a sense I'm familiar with, so maybe you have another. Go ahead.
Yeah, and maybe I should know what you mean with deep sourcing because I may be using a term that has a formal definition that I'm not aware of. But what I mean by deep sourcing is that I think that every highlight should have an associated source, and not just that the single page you're looking at has good sourcing information that maybe is auto-populated by the hypothesis system, but that because when a page quotes another source that maybe even quotes another source, it would be valuable for a system that's highlighting that 2 levels deep source to be able to say this is actually this source that I'm capturing here. And yes, it appears here,
Fair.
But this source I'm talking about. And I think there's a lot of other things like that too. Like, does this source live inside this other sources? So do you have a 2-level system of collections and sources? Do you have a infinitely tiered system? Like I can allow any sort of thing to exist in anything else. Do you allow multi-appearances in collections? Like this article appeared in this journal, but also appeared in this later republication of collected articles by some other editor. Those are the kind of things I'm thinking of when I talk about deep sourcing, but I maybe need a different term.
Very interesting. That I'm not aware has been done. One step towards that you may want to be aware of, but it's an intermediate step. When there's someone called Frode Hedgeland, he's very interested in scholarly publication, and he's wrote this tool, which is a Mac app called Author. And the one thing that's interesting about the way Author deals with sourcing is that when you copy paste between web pages in his system or between documents in his systems, it will become a full bibliographic reference. Like it's a notion of copying in a way that keeps provenance and everything so that you can paste it as a full bibliographic reference. Now, how to detect embedded, unfortunately, the web HTML tags have not standardized this. And if they were to standardize this, I thought it would be adopted, but certainly it should be possible to, and this is very interesting and not a very hard problem, detect a quote, have human crowdsourced or automatic when possible machinery try to find the origin of the quote with a Google search. And then basically have a kind of hypothesis layer that says this quote comes from here. So that when somebody wants to quote within the nested quote, it would detect the quote origin in the hypothesis layer. Now, one thing that means, and this is something very few people understand, and that's really important, this is turning out to be an interesting conversation, is you need nested highlights. Hypothesis does single level highlights, which is not it. There's 2 people who really understand nested highlights. There's Condé Nast, interestingly, has come up with a new library called @JSON, which is basically standoff styles for text. They've decided to kill Markdown, use @JSON, JSON, and it's by Condé Nast. And it's not open source yet, but the spec is out. But it is supposed to go open source, and I think there's parts of the library are open source.
Could you elaborate a bit more on what nested highlighting is?
Okay, I was getting into that. The notion, and the other one, just to finish, who does that well, of course, is Ian Neal of Codex. Codex is one of the most fascinating tools for thought in development. So what's the, okay, standoff annotation in general is, instead of having style inline in the text, you have the text as a pure run of text, and then you have, oh, from here to here, that's a bold, from here to here, that's a link, from here to here, that's italics. The advantage of that is it's very possible to say, this is a link, this is a link, this is a link. So you can have both overlap and nested link anchors. And then how do you display that becomes a UX problem, but it's, again, at least you have the data to do it. If you do anchors with doing, for example, overlapping anchors is all but impossible. In even nested, the UX doesn't do it well. So when you're talking about being able to say, oh, I'm taking this quote from within this quote. So you have to have the UX be smart enough that even though there's the highlight over region of text, I can still select inside to make another highlight inside or overlap. And that is much more possible with overlapping runs, which of course get translated to spans because that's the technology we have, but at least they're translated to spans where if there's a overlap, you go, okay, from here to here is one span, from here to here is two spans, and from here to here is one span. And you can kind of unnest you can unnest in the DOM realization. Anyway, this is all a bit tricky.
And that's not possible with hypothesis right now. So when there's one highlight already, you cannot select something smaller inside that highlight?
If it's a highlight that's part of your view, no. Now, of course, you can just hide it and take it. Because you can certainly have multiple overlapping highlights in the storage in hypothesis, but there's a UX issue because highlight is a click, is a span is a click. Yeah, but it's totally a UX problem. It's not a storage problem.
I have a, where is this? Oh, share. Is this the right window? Can you see,
Yes.
is this the right page? Where did it go? So I'm trying to match up what I am interested in, or what I've been looking at with what you're saying. And so I just figured it'd be faster to just show you this because it's kind of what you're talking about. So I've been looking at this at a very initial level. So like you highlight something, oh, there's actually a claim inside that's interesting. Can you highlight that? And just this, it's an interesting, it's not like it's super complicated, but it's an interesting problem of like, okay, how do you handle, these layers so that they look okay? Because you don't want the longer thing to be underneath the shorter thing. You want the longest thing to be on the closest to the text, and you want it to sort of layer outwards. And
do you handle overlaps?
Well, this is an overlap, right? I think.
No, this is a nested. This is nested. Like,
oh, overlaps is in like this. Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
I think so. I think I thought about this.
Good. Excellent.
So, yeah.
Excellent.
So this,
well done.
I mean, I spent a little bit of time with this, and this was the Chrome extension is someplace I'd like to spend more time, focusing on it, but I just haven't done a ton yet.
Right. I've been thinking in terms of UX, basically having making the anchors visible, like having brackets, and then when you hover over one bracket, it highlights the space between the brackets. But and that means you can have multiple brackets starting at one point, or you can have nested bracket. That's just one way to do it.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have a lot more to show here. I could maybe stop
No,
sharing,
but
but I just wanted you to
so
show
you've also worked on the problem. Excellent.
a bit. Yeah.
Excellent. And the moment you have that, then it's easy to say, okay, well, this is a quote and has an origin, and like crowdsource the identifying the quote. And often, if you're lucky, not often, if you're lucky, there'll be a quote tag. If you're not lucky, there'll be a style, a span or a div with some information. And then the question is, can you use that as a basis to Google the origin? One thing Hypothesis does do for you that is not obvious is that, for example, if you have a PDF with a DOI that's in many URLs, it will know, oh, that's the same DOI, or that's the same, there's some signatures it uses to know this is the same document in a different location. And if somebody else took a highlight of that document from a different location, I'll still show it to you. Okay. So there is a kind of, and when I said it does deep sourcing, it understands document identity a bit better than just one thing. It could do better at, I think, is do the same with blog posts. Like if you have a WordPress site, right? You have a URL for individual posts, and then you have a composite page, which has all the posts of the month, of the day, of the tag, of whatever. And if you take something from there, it should know that this is page independent and it's the same post in different views. It's the same unit of information, but you can do it for WordPress, and you have to do it for each bloody CRM that has a different identity marker. This is something that should be standardized. It is actually better standardized in HTML5. You have a kind of content item tag, if I remember well, but I have not studied that in depth, and so I don't remember off the top of my head.
I think one thing that I've also been thinking about in this space is, I guess, internalizing types of claims that relate to sources. So a claim that is, this highlight on this URL or this highlight on this web page is this speaker. Like that's a claim, and it could be true or false. Like maybe it's a different speaker, or maybe we don't know the speaker, or this highlighted text is this source. And while I think structured ways of identifying source are interesting, I also think that for issues of fake news or misinformation, disinformation, or just mistakes, I think it's important not to over-index on what the source itself says it is. That should be useful as far as recommendations of like, okay, we think it's this, we're going to auto-populate the information, or here's what related things based on what it says it is. But it should be possible to disagree with that, and for the system to handle that well, because what if there's some website that it makes its whole shtick is putting up fake idents and then putting in misleading information, and some sort of naive system looks at that like, oh great, it's this authoritative document identity, source identity, oh, and it's got these claims, so they're probably true, and then I'm going to happily go on my way treating this as true claims. But you need a system who's going to handle the broad ecosystem of the way agents present information online, needs to be able to handle that being false, those structured identifiers.
Absolutely. And this is where I do believe keeping track of sources are important. There's been a fascinating Twitter thread by Mike Caulfield, who I think is one of the really interesting thinkers in the let's learn to deal with disinformation space.
Is it COFF or CAUFF Caulfield, or?
CAULFIELD, and I think it was
at Holden.
Yeah, at Holden. He had, let me actually find it because I think it's extremely interesting. He was basically saying, and I know, Tim, you won't like this, but I mean, this is somebody in the field. Keeping track of claims is a total guacamole, and you do need at some point to know who's saying this. and why. And because if somebody is sensitive to disinformation, they'll be sensitive to disinformation.
If they're sensitive to disinformation, sorry.
Typing and talking, you have to be careful about that stuff.
Yes, sorry. Right. Yeah. Okay. Let me actually let me disable this service. Actually, pause, unclack. Thank you.
So now that because Tim disagrees, it would be very interesting to hear the reason.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Sure. Let's go. While I search, that's a good thing. Go ahead.
Like the reason is I mean, it makes sense when you're debating through documents about what this person says and what that person says, and well, in this article, this person said that, and so forth. Okay, you need to know who said what and why to see if you trust them. But the point of the canonical debate is to pull these claims out of the context of who's saying what and what your interpretation is of what they're saying. I'm using even words that Marc-Antoine wants to do. To have the debate without all that mess, right? Well, maybe they said that, maybe they didn't. No, let's forget what they said. Let's just talk about it, reason through it. And here's the thing is, I'm not against sourcing documents. I'm not against that sort of thing. I want it for evidence. Yes, you need to cite evidence. And I agree that when you cite evidence, it comes up with all the problems that you've mentioned with this. Who said it? Are they reliable? Did they really say that? All that stuff, provenance, all that sort of thing is important when you're using it as evidence, right? But when you're trying to hold the debate in an unstructured place, all that stuff is important. The goal here for me is to structure it so that you start off without depending on all that other stuff. It's the same thing. It's sort of like appeal to authority. You need to appeal to authority in lieu of real information, right? When you don't have actual information, you go to the second best thing you have, which is ask experts who you trust that have that information, right? But if they could replace themselves with the actual evidence, right? You know, same thing with an eyewitness. An eyewitness saw them do that. Okay, you have to rely on the eyewitness unless you actually have a reliable camera that caught the thing or you personally saw that, right? And that's what I'm trying to do with the canonical debate, is get rid of kind of hearsay and replace it with the real information. And so a lot of that debate about who said what and all that, I hope becomes irrelevant, right? But you do at some point end where you need to prove things with evidence, and then you got to prove the validity of the evidence and all that.
Yeah.
Wait,
I have my hand up. Do you want to try using the hand raise? I could either do physical hand raise or I just use the software.
Doesn't matter. We just have to respect it.
Okay. Thank you, Marc-Antoine. So Tim, I absolutely agree with the utility of sort of creating this separate argument space to have this, more, what I don't want to say dismembered, that's the wrong word, but, more detached or more, focused
impersonal
conversation on the logic, impersonal perhaps. Totally agree with all that. But for me, one of my the use case I'm very excited about, or use cases, are two things. I'm really excited if I were to come to a new source, a New York Times article, some Fox News article, a Breitbart News article. Maybe I'm like, I'm not particularly a Breitbart news reader, but when I go to them, I'm like, okay, what here is actually factual? What here is completely BS? And has someone done the work here to find this for me? I want to come to the source, and I'd like to be able to then pull in the work of others. Okay, so my people I follow, or the people who are esteemed in this argumentation community, however the system handles that, I would like to see their annotations. Okay, like, oh, bright red, most people I tend to agree with think this is total bogus, and here's the reason why. Okay, the rest of it is green or doesn't get coloring because we don't bother highlighting things that have support. That I'm really excited about, because I think most people get their information practically through intermediaries. There's their actual evidence sources, but then there's the people who spread that information, the journalists, the blog writers, whoever. And I think it's important to bring the truth, to bring the dialogue around, or whatever you call it, bring the canonical debate around the claims to the transmission of the information, because that's where people are picking that information up initially. So, and then the second thing is I want to contribute to that system, you know, just, I mean, that's a small, you know, corollary, but, you know, if I come to a page and I'm like, oh, wow, I'm sure this is false, you know, but I don't see anyone has done any work in canonical debate to prove it, and they haven't linked it here. I go do the research, I find it's not in canonical debate, I find better evidence, I link it to that page, and now people who come to that, you know, New York Times article or whatever, Breitbart's news article later, they now benefit from this work I've put into it because I've linked it into canonical debate.
Right. So I agree with that use case. I want that sort of thing to happen. My concerns about it, one is it to me just kind of adds to the spaghetti-like nature of the internet, which is you're pulling together the information you could find, and somebody else is going to pull the information together they could find. And in order to see that interaction, you need to go to the New York Times. And one of the points of canonicality is, where's the central place where I can just go to find out the information about that, all the information, right? So who's collecting that in one place that I can go? And, you know, maybe somebody who hasn't even read the New York Times can go and add something. So that's one of the concerns is, you know, I want people to not have to know about this greater context and who's holding debates where, and just go, here's a point being made. I've been studying this. Let me just add that one thing. So there's that aspect. I guess that's it, is where's the one place people can go? Are they going to be able to get the whole picture through all of this? And can somebody contribute without having to have been in on the conversation, right?
Yeah, I don't think in exactly the same way about one place, but even if you're on this New York Times thing, it should be possible to say, okay, I want the overview on this issue, meaning alternative views, alternative ways of seeing that problem. And you should be able to ask the Canonical Federation for me, but it doesn't matter. But what matters is that you get a view, which is not the original text view, which is here are the terms and here are the arguments on this page, and here they are placed as a sub-graph of the broader graph of the pros and cons of the broader debate. And so you get this broader view. But I agree with both. I mean, we want a kind of we want a content-centric view. We want to say, here's what you're reading, and here are the claims. And as you said, like how solid or how consensual or how disputed are each of the claims in there. And maybe might have different colors for claims you agree with, but that are very disputed, as opposed to claims that you agree with, but that are uncontroversial, right? I think that's also an important piece of information. It's still, if it's you agree with, but it's disputed, well, you still want to make word buttressing them.
Did you say word buttressing?
Yeah.
Did you say buttressing? What does it? What does it mean, buttressing?
To give.
Well, I know buttressing means to give support, but you said word buttressing, I think. So, you're just saying person may want to add support.
You may want to buttress an argument that you agree with, but you know is controversial, which is something you would want to do, I think. So it's not just agree, disagree. It's again, it's this interface between your opinion and the global, and then totally different view, which is the canonical view, which is how does this little local point of view centric knowledge graph fits into the broader knowledge graph of everything we've taken from anyone about this controversy. And now, yeah, the question of and being able to contribute to it. The question of what do we do with spam sites, right? Sites that misattribute things deliberately as a kind of, that is a perfectly good question. But I do believe at some point we'll have to be able to say that, you know, it's come from this site is known for not checking information, so it's shaky. not having evidence or not providing
Right.
evidence.
The question there is, do we need more advanced structures, more formalization, or can we handle it through the basic argument structure?
I think we need another layer. I don't think, all the argument structure can give you is consistency, right? When people introduce contradictory statement, the consistency can only give you so much. You'll notice, okay, these two things are inconsistent. So now, then what?
No, the basic argument structure is the structure for talking about, is this a reliable source and that sort of thing. It's just that it's not the most efficient way to do it, and it doesn't help you do it over and over and over again quickly, right?
That's an interesting point. I suspect, and this is pure intuition on my part, that there will be something like the Google algorithm for PageRank, which will be a kind of truth rank. How much is this particular claim being repeated by an ecosystem of sources? And it is true that the disinformation, there's echo chamber and repetition, but the disinformation, it's more shrapnel. So each individual claim is not repeated that much. And if you look at the disinformation chamber, also there's no worry about making these disinformation claims consistent between themselves. So I think there will be higher level algorithms, but this is way, 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 way in the future, right? But I do think that there is something that a well-buttressed view is buttressed by an ecosystem of people building on it, using it, and so on. It's the connectome of the claim is what will make it believable. But that's pure intuition, and we're nowhere near there.
So I was going to take in a similar, a little bit different direction, but back to, I think, kind of the thing Tim was bringing up about sort of like, how does this not become fragmented? I don't want the conversation just to be on New York Times or whatever the particular source person's looking at. And my thinking on that matter is the first thing that a user of the system needs to do when they've highlighted a piece of text is they need to make a very good effort. This is a very difficult thing to do. They figure out what is the best way to phrase this claim. And I think the system should incentivize claims that have general appeal. So not just claims that include bias or that leave certain important facts out, or that the other side, so to speak, or people who disagree with this claim, won't like the wording because it's kind of slanted towards a particular conclusion. Who are the users that can paraphrase or phrase claims that appear in sources that gain general appeal? So most people looking at that, regardless of their sort of viewpoint or stance, can say, yeah, I agree that's what the New York Times is saying there, even though I don't agree with the truth of that itself. I agree that's what they're saying. That's the first step. So and that's a process, right? People will have alternative phrasings, and we want a way to find the best ones, and find a way to filter through different variations on them, and reward ideally the ones that do have this broad appeal. Then and that process, once those are found, that is then the segue into canonical debate. And I'm not saying that the various claims would not be in canonical debate. I mean, the various claims would be in canonical debate, but once people sort of all agree on, yeah, that's the thing that's being claimed here, now that's where really the canonical debate takes off, because okay, now that we all agree on what claim we're actually talking about, that source, now we can just talk about that claim generically. And and someone just approaching that claim through canonical debate directly, not through any source, they can also engage in that conversation because that claim stands alone. It was well formed and it has broad appeal through whatever processes we come up with to try and identify that. So that was my thinking, sort of the appearance of claims in sources, or the careful crafting of paraphrases so that of highlighted text into claims, so that they then become like those good representations that can be discussed or debated.
Right. So I see that kind of in a similar light, but I see it as ideally it's more like, if the canonical debate is already canonical, right? It's like they're saying this, but here's the sentence. Let's just match it up to, I think this is the claim they're making here. It already exists in the canonical debate. So it's a connection between the canonical debate, canonical claim, and and that highlight, right? And there is a debate there, right? Which is, let's choose which of these variations is the one we think it is. And I know Antoine, that's what you've been saying all along, right? And I do see that a purpose for that, right? I do see that as something people want to do, right? It's just a separate layer is what
that's what Carl is saying. It's a kind of a preliminary step. I mean, before you can say, let's match it to that sentence in the canonical debate, somebody has to have done this rephrasing step.
Right, but maybe it's not rephrasing. Maybe it's already been phrased and it's just connecting it up, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if it's been phrased, it's because it's been rephrased the first time, possibly. But it's possibly, you're right. It's possible it's been introduced as a phrase directly in the debate, not from a source. And that's something that can happen. And then it's
that'd be ideal. That'd be ideal. You're reading through a source and the canonical debate extension is able to say, okay, I think this claim is this, or some other user already identified this. It's widely agreed that this is the claim. I mean, that's great, I think.
Actually, I think there's something else that's more ideal, which is after that phase of that's how it's used, the authors themselves are making their statements and saying, this is what I mean with this one.
Exactly.
This is what I mean with
this
one.
Right.
Right.
If the actual author then confirms, it's like a jackpot win, not only is this, I mean, I guess there'd be two versions, right? There's the broad appeal because maybe people don't agree with what the author says they're saying. But yeah, if the author agrees with your interpretation of their saying as a generic claim, I think there's like a special bonus in the system for that. Like, wow, good job. Yeah. Or the authors themselves go through and make those claims, I guess, or paraphrasing, assuming they're good at it.
Right. It's part of the article writing process, kind of like academics, scientists are supposed to cite each phrase they say. They're supposed to cite the proof for it as they go. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Absolutely, that would be brilliant. Well, so I think we're all in agreement here. So should we start on the presentation, on the SOA presentation? I think we've exhausted that topic, unless somebody disagrees with my claim that we've exhausted.
If you're ready to go with it, yeah, go for it.
Well, it's a presentation. We'll run through it and let's see what we make out of it. I think it's the way to go. This one, yes. So, relating knowledge graphs to logic, language, and the world. So here, he's putting many things together and he's very much into dialects that he's developed for expressing what he calls conceptual graphs. That's his thing is conceptual graphs. But here he's saying, well, there's knowledge graphs which use many dialects themselves, including the DOL standard for distributed ontology modeling maps those notations to common logic. And there's a clip dialect, which makes readable. Clip is readable as turtle. Are you familiar with turtle? Should I go into it? Should I give basics of semantic web? Because this assumes knowledge of semantic web.
That would be good.
Yeah, might as well.
Okay.
Something to do with triples, I think RDF triples, but I'm not
Absolutely correct. Okay. The basic idea of RDF is extremely simple. Every claim in RDF is subject, predicate, object. It's a triple. The predicate is a binary predicate. If you want higher level predicates, just build them out of them. Every RDF is resource description format. So every entity in RDF is a resource identified by a URI, URL or URN, but there's a URI for every subject, every predicate. Objects can be resources or literals, strings, numbers, dates, whatever. So what you have in RDF is a bunch of claims, which can be, and then there's many syntaxes, some XML based, some not. But if you just look at turtle, which is a very, very compact notation for RDF, which has the advantage of being easy to read, you get something. This is an example of turtle, and let's just go through the example quickly. Because URLs are long and cumbersome, it's common to give a prefix, a shorter URL by saying, oh, when I use this prefix, I mean this. And so it's possible to make certain things shorter. So here we have FOF person. Well, FOF means this, so that means this is really standing for HTML FOF/person. So this is FOF becomes a namespace. Person is a concept in that namespace. Is an abbreviation for RDF :type. So we're saying Green Goblin has type person. And here we have some relationship schema. I don't know where they took that one from, but that's the beauty of RDF. You can pick up schemas that define a vocabulary of relationships and classes and use that to make statements. And some schemas, because each schema does its own little local micro vocabulary thing, there will be overlap, and that's fine. A schema may explicitly say, well, I'm using this local name as an equivalent of this other name and this other schema, all same as. You can do it from outside. You can say, oh, by the way, this name in this schema is same as the name of that schema. Or you can subclass, of course. And the turtle syntax then is, oh, here, this means we're in the base, the base namespace. If you don't give a namespace, you're in the base namespace. So here is Green Goblin in the base namespace. So subject, predicate, object, semicolon, new predicate, new object, semicolon, new predicate, new object, period, new subject. And you can also use commas, by the way. Green Goblin, enemy of Spider-Man, comma, another object, comma, another object, comma, another object, semicolon, a new predicate, new object, semicolon, and so on. So that's the syntax of Turtle, and it's the most legible RDF syntax. Then there's variants of Turtle that take into account graphs, because you can say those claims are asserted by this knowledge base, and that's what is known as a graph in RDF. So you can have multiple knowledge base, and instead of saying I assert this, you just say I assert that this is asserted by this knowledge base. So that's the basics of RDF. My pet peeve with RDF is the triples themselves, the claims themselves are not addressable. That's
what?
Addressable. They don't have an identity. Making meta claims is difficult. What you do then is you reify the meta claim, and then the relationship of the claim and the meta claim is obscure, but it's getting better. That's me complaining about RDF, but that's.
I kind of would have thought that'd be necessary for creating those multi-object or multi-whatever parameter relations. But
if you want to do multi-parameter, what you do is you create the multi-relation as a subject, and then each of the roles becomes a predicate. So it's called reifying the predicate. And normally you reify a triple, and then you have a type RDF triple with RDF subject, RDF predicate, RDF object as the elements of the reified triple. Okay, so that's
which part's not addressable? Like what is it you want to do you can't?
A triple itself
like cross
cannot be used
documents
as a subject, for example.
If I reify the triple, okay, so here there's a first triple, which is Green Goblin, enemy of Spider-Man. That's my first claim in this. Okay, so that's a triple. If I want to say this is false, I can create the reified triple. Oh, there's an RDF triple. I'll give it an identity, and it has as subject Green Goblin, relation enemy of, and object Spider-Man. This reified triple, I can say that this reified triple is false because I've given it an identity. But I can still have the claim there. There's no constraint that the claim doesn't exist. Like the relationship between claiming, as I'm doing here, and claiming the reified triple. The reified triple is just quoting, in a way, the triple. And the relationship between the claim and the quote is totally undefined. That means I can claim and quote, I can claim and not quote, I can quote and not claim. in a way, that's fine. But what I'm saying is, if I say, oh, this is likely, is this a claim or not a claim? Well, it's not in the claim database, right? Because I suppose I've not put it in the claims as a triple. So if you're asking the RDF system, does the person believe that? Well, I have a meta claim that the triple is likely, which is not equivalent to claiming it, as it shouldn't be up to a point, but there's no, the Sparkle engine will just give me a blank. Nope, that claim is not in database. That's it. It won't tell me, oh, it's there as a meta claim and it has a likelihood attached, because the system is very, like, if you look for claims, you don't find meta claims, and if you look for meta claims, you don't find claims. They're separate, unrelated queries, which I don't think they should be. I think whenever you query a claim, you should get also the reified version and whatever meta claims I've made about it. But that's, again, that's me complaining. A lot of people are very happy with this system. But again, that's not important. What's important is, no pause now, thank you. What's important is the RDF system is extremely simple. Subject, predicate, object, and they're organized in graphs, and here's a syntax for it. And let's go back to that. And then there's clip is readable as turtle. That is, clip is a layer above turtle to express common logic. And he'll define common logic later. For the RDF and all subsets, clip is readable as turtle. Oh, sorry. That means RDF and all are subsets of clip. For the full expressive power, clip resembles predicate calculus. Tools based on clip and DOL can relate knowledge graphs to any language or logic, natural or artificial. So that's quite the claim. So what's a knowledge graph? What do we mean exactly by knowledge graph? Simplified semantic networks. So he's saying knowledge graphs are stored as triples. Not everybody stores knowledge graphs as triples. Some people use data log or basically tuples as opposed to triples, but triples are still a standard, a very important standard. And so let's assume, yeah, it's mostly knowledge graphs are stored as triples. For the Jeopardy challenge, Watson used Dbpedia. Now, Dbpedia is basically taking the fact sidebar in Wikipedia and making them into triples. So it's an RDF expression of the most, like, not descriptive, not language, but, you know, subject, predicate-ish parts of Wikipedia. And it's updated and it's useful. It's a great resource. Watson added a wide range of AI technology, and we want to make that easier. That's obvious.
That's cool. I didn't know that about Dbpedia. That's kind of seems obvious in retrospect, but it's a good idea.
Oh, yeah. It's very useful. Knowledge graphs can represent symbolic models that are directly related to ontology, language, and mental models. We'll define all this. Different aspects of knowledge. That's really interesting. The world is everything we encounter in space and time. Mental models represent everything we experience and imagine. So think the Peircean triad, right? Language, concept, objects. So this is the concept object edge of that. And I guess knowledge graph, ontology are kind of languages, I guess, but they're not natural language. But here's language at the middle, actually. So this is the Peircean triangle right here. Language, mental model, and words. Symbolic models consist of word related by words to other words, and that's what a lot of predicate logic does, but make it more formal. Ontology is a catalog of the words and what they refer to. So when we speak of ontology, and especially in this semantic web context, it's about saying, well, these are the types of things I'm interested in, and the subclass relationship between these types of things, and maybe subparts and predicates that I expect to find on each of those types of things. So the frames, if you will, of the type of things including actions here.
I like this one. Symbolic models consist of words related by words to other words. Yeah, okay, works.
Sure. And reasoning, that's all our way of thinking about anything. So those symbolic models and those ontologies. And obviously ontologies are a symbolic model. It's interesting that he distinguishes them, but it's a very specific kind of symbolic model. Action is what our thinking leads us to do. Natural languages represent conscious knowledge. I wouldn't necessarily say that, but certainly express knowledge. But, you know, images are a kind of language, maybe. Anyway, every artificial language, notation, or diagram is a simplified or stylized version of something that could be said in natural language. Correct? The nervous system contains an enormous amount of unconscious knowledge that supports the basic operation of the human body. Also correct. Designing tools to support all of the above would be nice. But what we're looking for is basically a language that expresses all of the above. Doing reasoning and action is out of our scope, but expressing it is in scope. DOL, Distributed Ontology Modeling and Specification Language, as a standard for integration and interpretation among distributed ontologies, model, and specification. So knowledge graph, and again, those are mostly RDF. UML and semantic web logics are supported by DOL. So UML is a case of, you can do ontologies in UML, obviously. Tools based on DOL can map knowledge graph to inform those logics. Yeah, UML has its own, can be seen as a formal logic. DOL is formally defined by logic as mathematics. It uses common logic, defined later. But we can still use whatever because DOL is supposed to be the one going to rule them all. He goes into UML. I don't think I want to go deep into UML, but what is interesting is UML's being formalized and the definitions have been stated in common logic, which is interesting. So again, that means that these DOL formal language can facilitate data sharing. How does that done? The DOL standard specifies formal mapping from the semantic web logics and UML diagrams to TPTP, when I don't even remember.
Sorry, this is getting, there's a lot of alphabets here. What is CL? So what are semantic web to CL? What is the CL?
CL is common logic here, and, and to be defined later. So a lot of things here are to be defined later. So I'm asking you to just, we'll get there. For most of the TPTP and CSL, I don't remember. So we'll see.
Well, thousands of problems for theorem provers, TPTP.
Oh, cute. Many sorted logic, of which classical verse logic is a single sorted subset. Oh, nice. So it's a type-rich logic. Nice. So that's new to me.
Sounds fun.
And CSL is the logic for heterogeneous tool set, which can implement the mapping. So I think CSL is a way to map logic to one another. And again, I wish I read that thing a while ago, and I obviously forgot a lot of it. What is important? OWL, however, is important. OWL is the how to define an ontology in RDF. So it's an RDF schema for defining ontologies. RDFS stands for RDF schema, so that's kind of a layer one, how to do ontologies in RDF, and OL is a layer two. Ontologies, like simple ontologies are done in RDFS, and more complex one in OL, and you use RDFS to define OL. So there's a bootstrap process here. And here, EL, QL, RL, I think these are entity logic. Do they say? No, they should. I'm trying to remember. One of them is, those are subsets of logic. You know, there's all these different kinds of logic systems which are more or less expressive and more or less decidable in more or less computational time. So
Yeah, I
people
don't mind.
spend.
I don't mind that there's. Oh, sorry. I was just saying I don't mind that there's some alphabets I don't understand. I think I was more concerned. I was like, wait, should I know what CL is? And since it was the title of the slide, I wanted
No,
to
no,
make sure.
CL is important. It's common logic, but it's not defined yet. So you're not dreaming. Using DAL with knowledge graph, usage scenario for DAL may be adapted to data from knowledge graph. And FOL here stands for first order logic. Are used, yeah, you're still there, which is very much. So the notion that we can, yeah, interrupt between all and first order logic, I think that's clear enough. First order logic, reminder, that's predicate logic with existential and universal quantifiers on entities, but there's no universal and universal quantifiers on classes. Otherwise, it's higher order logic. Translating development current to prov. I don't know what prov stands for. Maintaining different version of ontology in languages with different expressivity. So again, he's saying we can unify all these things.
Marc-Antoine, sorry to interrupt. What's your goal of this presentation? It's like that we should be aware of the whole thing. Like what's the way?
Yeah. Okay. What's the goal is a bit later. He introduces, and this is really important, common logic, clip diagram, conceptual graphs, and common logic. And you asked, how do we represent claims? And basically, common logic is SOA's answer to that question. And then he defines common logic a bit further. This I'm passing quickly because, frankly, it's a bit of a side issue for us. You're absolutely right to ask the question, but we're getting to what is common logic, which is the part I want to get into.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, the motivation for this was we asked, are there existing, research best practices or whatever propositions, but proposals for representing formally claims?
Exactly.
This is Marc-Antoine pointing us to some of that.
To one of those answers, and common logic is an ISO standard important answer. I'm not saying we must or even should use that, but I'm saying this is the kind of standard answer from symbolic AI. And then we'll look into
it would be good to try out like different claims in the list I started filling out if we could take a larger list. And
absolutely.
At least go through an exercise of trying to apply it and see what maybe our limitations are.
Absolutely, I'm all for it. But let's look at what common logic is, and we'll get into that. Logics for UML and semantic web are decidable. That's important, but it's a problem. Restricting expressive power cannot improve performance. Okay, that I find interesting. It just makes certain problems impossible to state. Natural languages are more expressive than any version of logic. That's obvious. The only people who can state an undecidable sentence are those who have studied against logic and true. The first order logic of Principia Mathematica are trivial for the TPTP. So basically he's saying at this point, most of what we care about is decidable, not everything. Not CL, and that's interesting. He's saying UML and semantic web can't express everything that there is in natural language. That's interesting. Natural language are more expressive than
what
any
is the
version
definition of what's the definition of decidability?
Oh, decidability means you have axioms, you have rules of inference, and you have target claim, and you want to know, is the target claim reachable from these axioms and premises and rules of inference? Can we decide whether this claim is indeed decidable from those premises? And more important, is that computation guaranteed to end? I mean, in general, we know it's not true. Turing's theorem is that there is no, it's the halting problem, right?
In other words, you have to pay gas for your smart contracts.
Oh no, it's infinite gas. That's the point.
That's why there's gas. That's exactly why gas exists.
Yeah. Absolutely true. So yeah, so and here he's saying clearly natural language are more expressive than any version of logic. That's interesting because he's certainly one of the person who went the furthest trying to encode natural language as logic. And he's saying, you know, there's still stuff I can't express as logic, but let's see again what can and what cannot be.
Interesting claim.
Interesting claim. The question is it good enough? Which I think it is at this point, but we'll get there. And here we, the common logic interface to predicate calculus is a CL dialect that can serve as a linearization for knowledge graphs. So that's a linearization, that is a serialization or a language expression of something encoded in knowledge graph. The existential graphs by Peirce are the simplest graph logic with the full expressive power of common logic. So that's much more than predicate calculus. Okay.
So that's your EG in that graph before it's existential graph.
Yeah, that's correct. I should have remembered that. EG rules of inference and the methods for mapping EG to and from clip may be adapted to any graph logic used for knowledge graph, because common logic is kind of the superset of all these logics. It's like common Lisp, right? It's not a subset, it's a superset. So design goals for clip. Readable by anybody who knows predicate calculus, as readable as Turtle for RDF and OL, as readable as any notation for if-then rules, serve as a linearization for UML diagrams, query option, so there has to be a query language, and there has to be a support to support the mapping of knowledge graphs to logic and language. The existential graphs, maybe I should have begun with that one because he goes into existential graph, but frankly, if you look at his I think it's just after that, this slide here, the one that really interests me is conceptual graph, even more than clip. I think this is really readable. The existential graph is a bit hard to read. That's Peirce. Where was I? But
yes,
anyways.
this one, the cat on the mat is the next slide.
Yeah. Okay. So how to say a cat is on the mat. And so Frege had this extensive graphical notation, but I think this is the one we know best. There's an X, there's a Y, X is a cat, Y is a mat, and X is on Y. So that's an example of predicate calculus, first order logic rephrasing of this sentence. And Frege had a nice diagram way of doing this. But here we're saying we have to name the entities, and that's really important. Natural language uses anaphor. We kind of know, oh, this is the same entity as that, and we use pronouns, and isn't that convenient? In most formal languages, you will take the time to give name to the entities. That's what happens here. And Peirce has a kind of the pre-existential graph. He had a syntax for this, which was similar to what Peano came up with. And then Peirce made it into a graphical notation, a bit like Frege, and conceptual graphs are another graphical-ish notation, which happens to be very convenient. And we'll see why it's convenient later. And in modern clip, this is what you would do, which again is just another syntax for the same thing. So there's X, Y entities, X is a cat, Y is a mat, and X is on Y. This is
probably wrap up, unfortunately. I think the three of us all have to go, but I'm interested in learning, seeing this next, like maybe also with like Tim's idea of seeing its application to, I don't know where that list of sample claims is, but maybe if you can point us to it. If I missed it in Hangouts, just I'll look.
Yeah, but Friday basically will get into the rules of existential logic and what they allow, because I think it's extremely interesting. It's
certainly interesting. I worry if any Reddit user would ever, well, some of them would approach this, but I am interested. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Let's be clear. This is about formalization. Is that what we want to do? Is an open question, but I said, let's look at the state of the art. That was the question. Let's look at the state of the art. So this is about looking at the state of the art.
I agree. Yeah, I'm not trying to like criticize or looking at it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not recommending necessarily we do that, but I'm certainly recommending we're aware of it while designing.
Mhm.
And so I do
Agree.
want to go into some depth of that, into that. And I think that's mine.
Yep.
Okay.
So in general, yeah, bye, Carl. Just one match market one. I remember going through
Okay.
this presentation already, so feel free to continue without me next time.
Yeah.
Cool. See you next time.
Okay,
See you.
then
Bye.
see you next time. Bye.